Welcome to Intentism Shows, the official podcast of the art movement Intentism. Intentists include artists and writers and musicians, actors and philosophers who maintain that all meaning is the imperfect outworking of intention. We're particularly excited today as we welcome the author John Lawton to discuss the creative process and intention. John Lawton has penned some of the most successful historical crime and espionage novels, including the Frederick Troy novels. So thank you. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, the first question is a question related to the link between an author and the work. Now, I presume your love for Schubert is not simply a coincidence that the compositions you like are penned by the same composer, but rather there is something Schubertian in the work. And I read that Then We Take Berlin was described by your London editor as Troy without the Troy, hinting at a similar authorial style. Now, it's been unpopular in critical studies since Barthes and Foucault to talk about the tyranny of the author over the text. So, in your opinion, should one ever see the author in a work of fiction or just the world that he or she creates?
I was teaching in university 50 years ago when post-structuralist criticism, Barthes, Foucault, Macheray came into vogue. And I might add, I've never heard the phrase the tyranny of the author until you sent an email using that phrase. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, you can't stop someone seeing the author in your work if that's what they're going to do. But that's a very different thing from seeking the author when you read a work of fiction. And indeed, I think a rather bad motive for reading fiction is if you're trying to find the author is your primary intention. But you can't stop people seeing what they're going to see.
Thank you. One thing I've just been reading some extracts that I was looking at. In fact, I've downloaded two of the books. I was reading the beginnings of both Then We Take Berlin and The Unfortunate Englishman, and it wasn't really much to do with the author or like the personality behind the work, but I did find it was interesting that so for example, Then We Take Berlin, there was an interesting little bit of an aside when you're describing John Wilderness and his relationship with his wife and how they're happy to see each other urinate, basically. And it's a really lovely, it's almost poetical bit, a kind of recursive sentence where you were saying that seeing each other use the lavatory, that the public nature of a private education was hers versus a home which knew no privacy, which was his. And then earlier on, I was reading another one of your books, which was speaking about The Unfortunate Englishman. And in that, you were talking about at the very beginning, he took Berlin and Berlin took him. And I'm not suggesting that somehow or other, that, as I say, that I'm trying to look for an author or there's, as I say, anything like where I got the idea of the tyranny author, by the way, was I know that for certain people that are concerned about and worried about authorship as being the only way to understand the text, saw the 19th century kind of romanticism of the author, almost like the god over the work, as being something that limited any kind of freedom of understanding the work. And so I'm not suggesting that in your work at all, but I did find it interesting that there was a certain, not a house style, but I could see that both elements, even though it was a novel and it was fiction, had a kind of poetic element to them. And I don't know whether you see that you have is there a writing style that you feel that you have at all?
I think in any given series, and I've done two, there has to be a consistency of prose style and an approach to writing. I began the Wilderness series intending it to be different from the Troy series, but they ended up merging. Some of the stuff I've done simply as standalone, there's no stylistic resemblance to anything else I've written. I wasn't, by the way, against post-structuralist criticism, although it was one of the reasons I gave up on university, because there was a fundamental idea underlying it, which I absolutely agreed with, which is that most literary criticism prior to Macheray and Barthes had been called what does it call it? The phrase I had is completing the text. That is trying to tell you more about the text by working your way around it, rather than actually working with what was between page 1 and the end. I'm not sure. Oh, God, this is 50 years ago. I'm not sure I have any more reflections on that. But yes, I would say my way of writing, my self-writing, is consistently recognized as a composer, but it certainly has similarities. I think the possibilities are supposed to be much more diverse.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, but let's look to our second question. Now, the art group that I belong to believe the author's intention may not be the defining criterion, but it's certainly relevant to understanding the work's meaning, and certainly shouldn't be dismissed. So, however, how much we should be interested in a writer's ideas about their work conceived after the work is finished, to me, is up for debate. I'll give you one example. Paisley Livingston, who's a Canadian philosopher who was he spent most of his time lecturing in Lingam University in Hong Kong. He wrote a book called Art and Intention, and he had quite a controversial statement. He said that all the epistemological qualities should be present and complete when a writer finally puts his pen down for the last time. So the quote I'm going to give you from J.K. Rowling seems to be a little bit opposed to that. So J.K. Rowling recently divulged, after years of finishing the Harry Potter books, that Dumbledore was gay. So the question is, does it influence the statement's veracity if this notion was conceived after penning the work? So in essence, if the writer's opinions are post the work's completion, are they simply another reader's interpretation, no more or no less?
If you put a book out there, you're still its author. You can't unwrite a novel any more than you can unring a bell. Mm-hmm. Once it's out there is a distinct possibility that you end up being just another reader. The quotation you gave me from Joanne Rowling didn't say whether she had revealed this, having thought it all along, or just come up with it 10 years after the character was created. If you think you know everything about a novel you've written, then you're flying in the face of everything Freudian. Mm-hmm. One of the most revealing things I found in my fiction is hearing it read aloud by an actor, and the actor finds nuance in it that I didn't think I put there. Yeah. If we presume we know everything we've written inside out, then we're not allowing for the operation of the unconscious. J.K. Rowling is obviously very entitled to her opinion on the character. And so is everybody else once it's out there. You have to learn to disown. No, not to disown, to separate the work from yourself once you've published it, because you're throwing it into the circus arena for the lions and the Christians. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've worked with a lot of writers when I was in Telly, several of whom simply have false personae to separate themselves from the business of promoting their work and from answering questions about their work. Gore Vidal used to have very well-prepared paragraphs he'd trot out at the drop of a hat in an interview. Jerzy Kosinski told me I always wear a disguise. Mm-hmm. And Harold Pinter said, who's this bloke Pinter? Mm-hmm. As though the construct of Harold Pinter, no, if you'd only use the sentence, as though the construct of Pinter really wasn't connected to the man himself. Another thing you have to learn to do is ignore your critics. If you spend most of your time evaluating what the critics have said about you or answering them, and you should never reply to a critic, then you're not going to be getting on with the next book. Mm-hmm.
Interesting, thank you. It reminds me of a couple of things that I've read several years ago. I don't know if you've heard of that. There's a philosopher, an American philosopher called William Irwin, and he got his PhD many years ago writing a book called Intentionalist Interpretation. And he says we're never going to be able to omnisciently get to the mind of the author for multiple reasons, obvious reasons. But he thinks that author constructs are useful, where in a sense you're trying to piece together what the author might be like, but you know it's still a construct. And the other thing you said actually that I thought was very interesting, related to some of the readings that we've done as intentists, is back to Paisley Livingston. when he defines intention at the beginning of his book, Art and Intention, he includes all of the intentions, conscious and unconscious. So I thought that would be interesting, whether it was something you weren't aware of at the time that was simmering below. He would still consider that an intention in the work.
Most writers I know would actually say that they set out to write something, and then to a certain extent the book writes itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not... unconscious is one way. An extremely ridiculous, pretentious way of putting it is to say you have divine inspiration. But I go with a short, very short word Robert Graves used to use, the muse. Something takes over. It's not an external force, it's something you tap into in yourself that you didn't know you had.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, whatever intention you set out with can be diverted.
Mm-hmm.
I quite often, when I'm writing a book, have no idea what it's about until I'm more than halfway through. Even though the plot all laid out from A to Z, I still don't know what I'm writing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So there's kind of like maybe a vague kind of meta intention, and then you have these kind of micro intentions, almost like editing processes. It's just changing things while you just maybe hold on to the coattails of where it's going.
That's a very good image indeed. That's what it feels like, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, let's look at the third question then. So, Book List reviews your novel, The Unfortunate Englishman, as a gripping, richly ambiguous spy drama. Now, director Christopher...
Hello?
The film maybe 15 years ago called Memento, has said that concerning ambiguity, which is a big feature in his films, such as a spinning top in Inception, where if the top stops spinning, it entails that all that you've seen in the film it was a dream or not a dream. Even though the film ends before we know whether the top will spin or not, and the audience are left guessing, he said it's critical for him to know. He needs to know what the truth is, even if the actual film is ambiguous. So when you write in ambiguous terms, how important is it for you to have an idea of what's really going on?
It's paramount.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely paramount.
And why is that?
Because I think I'd be trying to capture chaos on the page if I didn't understand all the ambiguities and ambivalences in what I was doing. Now, it doesn't mean to say I'll get it right, but it is very, very important that I have a handle on the ambiguities.
Mm-hmm. And if you didn't, if you were still in the dark yourself, how would that manifest itself negatively on the page then?
I probably wouldn't finish the book.
Right.
I might say there's certain unfinished stuff kicking around, but mostly if I set that out to write a novel, 2 or 3 years later, finish.
Mm-hmm. How do you? One last question related to this, because I'm primarily a fine artist, a painter, and one of the things I've come unstuck with time and time again in my work is to say too much, to dot all the I's and cross the T's, and so instead of leaving something for the viewer to work with, I make things too obvious and too clear. So I'm certain that what I'm trying to express will be understood by the viewer, and often it weakens the work. So if you know the truth, is there not always a temptation to say too much?
No. You presume engagement from the reader. You can convey truth not necessarily with bold statements, but with hints. And as it works in my right client, with clues.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that comment as well. I think we'll wrap it up there, but it's been really interesting, really engaging. And I would like to thank, on behalf of the Intentism movement, John Lawton for being my guest today. And if anyone is continuing to be interested in this kind of discussion, on our website, which is www.intentism.org, we've got a podcast of debates and discussions. We've got a panel debate at the Royal College of Art about the art movement and post-structuralism. And there's also various books that we recommend purchasing as well, and Intentist artwork. So have a go and have a look at that if you're interested. But thank you again so much, John, for appearing and chatting with me about these ideas of intention and the creative trail. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.